Good evening and welcome to the Got Ancient Wisdom live stream. So we're going to carry on reading from Total Man, the tome. So if you, I've started posting the old ones. Not the ancient ones. I've started posting all the old chapters on other things like Brand New Tube. No, not Brand New Tube. What's one? BitChute. And what other one? Odyssey. If anyone's on Odyssey, add me on Odyssey. I'm feeling a bit lonely on Odyssey. They said, go to Odyssey, they said. There's lots of friends on Odyssey, they said. And then there's me with just 2 subscribers. So, yeah. If you're on Odyssey, I want to know what all the fuss is about, because I'm on there and it doesn't seem that heavily populated. Anyway, hi Ralph Hexham in the chat on YouTube. I've got there's 2 people watching on D Live as well. Hello D Live watchers. So we're gonna start with the reading anyway. Hold on, just checking all my different screens. So we're on chapter, I think it's hold on, check my entry. We're on chapter 6, and hello, the only way out is in. Good evening. Got the only way out is in official Got Ancient Wisdom bookmark. Can't really see it. It's too dark in here. I like it dark. So yeah, we're on chapter 6, which is some socio-behavioural phenomena of Western society. The last bit was sorry, the last bit was about the premature babies, whether premature babies dream in the womb. Yeah, so if you want to go back to that. But what I'm doing is putting the old episodes. I've been cutting out some of the fraff and then just putting the full episode up. Full chapter, 1 chapter at a time. So I've put chapter 1 and the preface up so far. If you need to catch up, but you just want to catch up with just each chapter without the intro and outro talking, then that's the place to go. And I'll try and put a chapter up every week, just so that everybody can keep up on those other channels. All right. We've had some actual, like, one of the comments I keep getting from people about Stan Gooch, and it's people who haven't even read Stan Gooch. I know they haven't, but they say Stan Gooch was a quack something or other, or a crackpot, or a loser, or some of these sorts of things. And then, so my question back is always, did or didn't they prove that that humans are part Neanderthal, which was proven with using genetic science in 2010? And did or didn't Stan Gooch propose that in 1972, which he did? So it's odd to me that people think that somebody putting forward something 30 years ahead of time is classed as a crackpot. So and Stan sort of reached that conclusion just through deduction, and reasoning from the point we're at now, reasoned his way all the way back to that original point, and it's a pretty spot on deduction, I think. So if his power of deduction is that good, then surely there's some other nuggets in his work that we could sort of get out of it again today, and learn from and build on top of. Because the problem is with his stuff is it never really got a full shake of the stick or a full investigation or whatever. So we don't really know what the outcome of most of it is, but we do know that his main assertion, which was that humans are a hybrid, has been proven correct, and on the year that, literally a couple of months after he died. So I'm gonna carry on where we left off. So we're on part 5 of chapter 6. If the system A, system B dichotomy proposed is as basic as alleged, then one will look for its influence as much amongst normal as amongst mentally disturbed individuals. While the proposal that mentally ill patients and normal individuals are subjected to experimental stress show the functioning of the various subsystems with particular clarity is in order, it is most desirable that the weight of argument should rest as heavily on the behaviour of the normal individual under normal conditions. Without this, the theory would be considerably weakened in its claim to deal with total behaviour and have instead possible relevance only to a pathological condition or conditions. In this section, a consideration is undertaken of certain everyday public phenomena. Not simply individuals, but entire movements and social systems in corporate life can be described in terms of the dominant influence of one or other personality subsystem. There is no magic involved here. It is simply that group behaviour is the sum of, or perhaps a balance struck in the interaction of, the individual behaviours of its members. Given a preponderance of individuals governed by B2, B1 or A, or some particular combination of these, in a particular group, that group then may be spoken of in those generalised terms. With that statement about the structure of groups, let us take the bull by the horns and say that it is clear that left-wing behaviour, such as communism, is a system B phenomenon, while right-wing behaviour, such as fascism, is a system A product. What grounds are there for this statement? As much perhaps by way of begging the question than by way of an answer, a number of statements are now made about these two political orientations. Here we see the two opposed and opposite factions described in the kinds of terms used already elsewhere in the present text. Let me just get a graphic up for this. I think I've got... Sleep, right, I've done that, okay. I'm going to have to get this graphic up for you, hold on. Too short. Slides. Hold on, I need 2 hands for this. Okay, I'm gonna... No, it's not in there. Oh well, sorry about that. So we've got 2 columns. On the left-hand column, we've got communism, system B, and on the right-hand column, fascism, system A. So I'll read. The first one will be system B in the communism column, and the second one I read will be system A in the fascism column. So comes up from below, communism, is placed on top, fascism. Revolution and coup d'etat or putsch, liberation and control, all men are equal, all men and women are equal, integration, there are natural leaders and natural followers, women are different and inferior, segregation, joining and opposed to splitting, theoretical equality of opportunity, collective ownership and responsibility, rule by nobility or elite, individual, rule by nobility or elite, individual ownership and responsibility. The masses versus the individual. Environment is the key. Lysenko, he quotes her. Genetic inheritance and natural endowment are the key. Automatic right to service and benefits, in parenthesis, mothering. Reward, where deserved or earned, and patronage, in parentheses, fathering. The state as a mother, and the state as a father. And then progressive education, the word meaning leading out what is within, so the word education. And then in fascism, traditional instruction, the word meaning building into or onto from within. And then neurosis in communism and psychosis in fascism or system A. The above constitute a sample of the characteristic ways of thinking of these two groups. Connections between some of these and the behaviours considered earlier in this volume may occur spontaneously to the reader, but in any case, these connections are enlarged on later. At this point, however, having made the head-on assault, it may be advisable to retreat a little and attempt instead a rather more gradual build-up of the position adopted. First, it is noted that the division into a major left-wing and a major right-wing party is generally agreed to constitute the stable configuration of politically mature countries. There are thus two major and basic political divisions or orientations. Once again, we find the ubiquitous two encountered so frequently elsewhere. Do these two political orientations have different attitudes to sex, and if so, why? Table 5 shows the number of women put up for election for Parliament and the numbers actually elected by the two major parties in Britain between 1918 and 1966. The figures are taken from the British Parliamentary Statistics 1918 to 1968. So Table 5 is candidates at general elections since 1918. And we've got from 1918, 4 women in the Labour and 4 women in Labour and 4 women in the Conservatives, and then 0 from either elected. And then coming up to 1966, actually it's during the 1950, so just after the war, we see 42 women running for Labour and 29 running for Conservatives. And then 14 of those women in Labour got elected, and 6 of the Conservative women got elected. The highest number of women Conservatives elected is actually 1931, interestingly. That was when they fielded 16 Conservative women and 36 Labour women. And out of those 36 women in Labour, 0 got elected. But out of the 16 Conservative women, 13 got elected. That's very strange. I don't know if anyone can explain what happened in 1936. He might go on to it, actually. And then 1966, we've got 30 women in Labour and then 21 Conservative women fielded. And then Labour elected 19 and the Conservatives 7. These figures show clearly that the acceptance of women as equals in the Labour movement is in general more of a practical reality than it is in the Conservative movement. The best guide is provided by the first 2 columns referring to the number of candidates, since the last 2 columns are to an extent modified by which party happens to be in favour with the electorate and gaining most seats. Thus, in 1923, when 3 Labour and 3 Conservative women MPs were elected, the Conservatives had gained 258 of the total seats available, while Labour had only 191. One needs also to appreciate that in that year there were 14 women out of 427 Labour candidates and 7 women out of 536 Conservative candidates. The Conservatives have a segregationist attitude to women. This is not anymore. You can actually, if you look at this chart, you can sort of see how Conservatives tail Labour. So Labour do something, and then in the next few years, the Conservatives are following on from that. And even with the number of women elected, they seem to be sort of Labour's leading, and then the Conservatives are following. Who else we got? Trevor Wright. Hello, Trevor Wright. Trevorn Wright. Great name. That's a good name, Trevorn. This is shown by single-sex secondary schools and originally by single-sex universities by the existence of clubs exclusively reserved for men and many and various social practices such as men drinking port in the library after dinner while the women are elsewhere and so on. Were one being psychoanalytic about this, one would say that the Conservative is afraid of women. Yet one might ask, if woman is regarded as inferior and excluded from any real power, where is the justification for supposing fear amongst the men? For an answer, we might turn to classical Greece, where the status of women was lower even than in conservative England. Yet, examining the myth and legend of Greece, one finds it strewn, as already noted, with female monsters. Scyllas, Charybdises, Medusas, Gorgons, Hydras, Harpies, and whatever. The whole unconscious, as such, it seems, is a place of extreme danger. Neither must one forget that it was women who directed the Greek mysteries. As the priestesses of that cult, they were most certainly feared, and in any case, putting the matter on a general footing and asking the kind of questions which Freud was fond of posing, why in any case would one want to keep anyone in subjection if one were not afraid of them? What are the chances of claiming the socialist as a man of the earth? A difficult question, perhaps in view, for instance, of the fact that many conservatives are farmers. Were the revolutions of 1789 and 1917 in France and Russia, after all, peasant revolutions? Of course, the leaders of the Russian upheaval were middle class and the mass were workers rather than peasants. But might one, without stretching language beyond what it will bear, speak of the worker as an urban peasant? That being, as it may, the great stress placed on the environment by communism and socialism, the most astonishing example of which is Lysenkoism, the belief in the transmission to offspring of characteristics acquired by the parent in the course of a lifetime, reminds one in many ways of the field dependence of women and their involvement with concrete situations. There is a good deal more of this nature that one could say, i.e. circumstantial, anecdotal, and arguable. It is preferable to offer more readily testable items where possible. A belief of my own is that were the average IQ of Conservative members of Parliament, as measured by conventional tests of intelligence, ascertained, this would exceed the average for Socialist MPs by virtue of the former's closer link with System A. There is evidence, certainly in the last Labour government's record, that while its heart may be in the right place, Socialism's head leaves something to be desired. The Conservatives have a better record as administrators and businessmen, but are perhaps notably lacking in compassion. The living conditions which most Conservative employers were prepared to tolerate for their employees a mere 100 years ago are, of course, by themselves entirely sufficient evidence of this. It is frequently said that Labour functions best in opposition. If there is a link between socialism, System B, and the unconscious, then, as it happens, opposition would be the natural situation for a left-wing party, and the one in which it would, in fact, feel most comfortable. If the Conservative Party is more closely connected with System A, then it would tend to be more successful when in charge, controlling and consciously directing activities. So we do still see that now with left-wing groups still seem to think that they are in opposition to some sort of power structure, whereas in reality they are the power structure. So there's definitely something to this idea that the way that the mind, when people identify it as left, the mind feels opposed to something that is pre-existing. So it's field dependent again. Okay, so, and then Ralph Hexham has put the current 220 total, 87 Conservative, so women. I guess this is women in Parliament. 87 Conservative, 104 Labour, 7 Lib Dem, 22 others. And then the only way out is in has said also maybe Labour and Tory has changed definition since the Marxists took over after World War II. Yeah, I agree with that. But I think that it's about what people identify as. So although Labour and Tory might have changed, most people who identify as Labour still have a sort of idealised version of what they think Labour means. And then people who identify as Tory also have a sort of idealised version of what Tory means. So anyway, these are all controversial matters. One would ask the reader, however, to reserve full judgment in this area until after Chapter 9, where somewhat more compelling reasoning is offered. We turn to some statistical considerations. The ratio of males to females in the general population is approximately 50-50. There are, in fact, fractionally more women, but this does not especially concern us. If a particular behaviour we were examining were somehow sex-based, and assuming this were considered solely on an either-or basis, that is, by an insistence on discrete yes-no categories, but otherwise without placing any other pressure on freedom of choice, would one not expect the incidence of that behaviour, the ratio of yeses to nos, to be also 50-50? There follow the voting figures for the last 4 general elections in the United Kingdom, considering outright Labour and Conservative votes only and ignoring all others. So we have 1955. Oh, okay. The only way out is in. Was mainly answering your query about the 30s, more women gaining power, etc. Yeah. I mean, it just appears there were more. That one year, 1931, I don't know what happened, but in 1931, it just appears there were just like zero. No one wanted Labour women in. They just wanted Labour. They just wanted Conservative women in big numbers. There follows the voting figures for the last 4 general elections. So remember, this is 1972, probably 1970 when he wrote this. 1955, Labour 12 million, Conservative 13 million. 1959, Labour 12 million, Conservative 13 million. 1964, Labour 12.2 million, Conservative 12 million. 1966, Labour 13 million and Conservatives 11.4 million. Is this not at least an interesting coincidence? What one is suggesting is that some kind of predisposing basis exists for this behaviour, all other things being equal. That is, where no other, more decisive counter-influences are in play. One is therefore not proposing that if, for instance, voters at the next election were offered £1,000 a head to change their voting allegiance, a large number would not do so. Having, however, remarked on the near equality in numbers of those voting left and right in recent elections in this country, let us now say that this precise equality is not in itself of major importance. What is of major importance is that there should be 2 substantial groupings. In the evolution of nations or peoples, I'm speaking particularly of the now Western nations, I suggest that an initial preponderance of System A linked genes is gradually replaced over time by a preponderance of System B linked genes. Consideration of this important submission is deferred, however, until Chapter 9, since a much broader canvas is required than we are using. The long-term process involved may have reached its mid-phase in the gene pool of the British Isles, hence the roughly equal voting strengths. For the present, let us suggest only a link between System B and 1, fecundity, the opposite, that is, of sterility, and 2, qualities of survival, including physical robustness of a certain type. This second factor is possibly reflected in the fact that more females survive birth and early childhood than males, despite the higher birth rate of male babies. 2 points may be considered. First, a fact frequently commented upon by historians and sociologists that peasant, working class, and various other such materially deprived populations living under some of the most appalling conditions imaginable nevertheless contrive to reproduce and grow at very appreciable speeds. This is a complex issue containing many elements. The very overcrowding and lack of other entertainment, for example, increases the rate of intercourse and therefore the rate of pregnancy considerably. That matters are, however, not that straightforward, may be judged from a second point, that an appreciable number of women in our present society in wholly adequate middle-class surroundings and with the help of every scientific and diagnostic aid remain unable to conceive. We cannot follow this path further here, but the psychological and medical literature provides support for a concept of fecundity that is relatively independent of environmental considerations. These reflections still by no means exhaust the statistical support for the view that voting behaviour is linked with the male and female principles, that is genetically based. There exists in statistics a concept termed a normal distribution. This, in graphical form, is a bell-shaped, bilaterally symmetrical figure as shown in Figure 7. So Figure 7 is a bell curve, and I think everybody knows what a bell curve is. The term normal distribution is applied when the incidence of a characteristic or function is symmetrically distributed on either side about the average value of the characteristic, with progressively fewer, greater or lesser values occurring as one departs from the average. Such a distribution is typical of a very large range of phenomena in nature, from the wingspan of a given species of moth to the running speed of lions. In Darwinian terms, it is what is described as the range of variability of a species. Let's try and just get I'm going to just see if I've got, because I've got these graphics somewhere. Does anyone want to address Trevor Wright's question, is socialism or capitalism in society? I'm trying to just work out what you mean there, Trevor. Sorry, mate. Is socialism or capitalism in society will ever be a solution for a society that everyone can agree on? Is it will socialism? No. No. The answer is no. That's the short answer is no. The long answer is total man. So you will have to sort of tune in and try and keep up with it to just sort of hear where all this goes. Right, hang on. I found these missing slides, I think. Hold on. Get all them in there. Okay, that. Right, here we go. So that's our Figure 7. If one measured the heights of all the 14-year-old boys in England and plotted the results graphically, a normal distribution would result and show that most boys were of average height for their age, with progressively and regularly fewer exceptionally tall or exceptionally short boys as one departs from the mean. The same holds true of a great many human physical traits and not a few psychological ones. Thus, for example, intelligence is normally distributed, at least amongst boys and girls, considered separately. This book is somewhat at odds with the view that the same statement can be made for boys and girls considered together, as already briefly discussed in section 2 of this present chapter. I have not seen the following statement in print, but there would seem no reason for not reversing the logic of the fact that inherited characteristics are normally distributed within any population, and proposing that whenever a characteristic, whether physical or psychological, is found to be normally distributed, it can be considered to be genetically based. A further distribution known to statistics is the bimodal distribution, an example of which is given in Figure 8a. So Figure 8a, that's that one there. So A is the left-hand side one. In this situation, two averages are present, around each of which individuals cluster in the way described earlier, but the two samples or populations overlap. A bimodal distribution would be produced if one measured the height of all 14-year-old boys and all 30-year-old men in this country. What one in effect obtains is two normal distributions which happen to overlap, since some of the boys would be as tall as some of the men. In figure 8b, these two results are plotted and the overlap indicated. If the two sets of scores were combined, figure 8a would result. Such a bimodal distribution would arise if one measured and combined, say, the height of all Scandinavian and all Japanese men, or of all adult men and adult women in this country. Obviously, then, a bimodal distribution may arise from difference of age, race, and many, many other factors besides sex. A sex difference can, however, constitute the reason for such a distribution. What can always be said is that the occurrence of a bimodal distribution indicates the presence of two separate influences or two separate populations, which one then seeks to identify and isolate, assuming that the result is unexpected. If it is supposed that the two extremes of radicalism, conservatism form a continuum from ultra-revolutionary to ultra-traditional, and that extreme left-wing and extreme right-wing behaviours represent respective examples of these, a third assumption might be that the strength of these tendencies in individuals could be measured, except that this last is not a supposition. Tests, in fact, exist for the assessment of the radical and the conservative personality. My doubt only is whether these have been administered to sufficiently large and genuinely national samples. What this book requires, ideally, is that the results from testing an adequate sample of men only, or of women only, should reveal a bimodal distribution of these political or personality traits, that is, two clusterings, one about an average degree of conservatism and one about an average degree of radicalism. Such a result would offer direct support for the existence within one physical sex of two sexes, that is, of two personality orientations, that is, System A and System B, respectively. Failing this, or additionally, one would look for a bimodal distribution of these traits in a mixed sex population, attributable therefore to behavioural differences between the sexes. Leaving now the direct frontal and hopefully objective assault on the question of political behaviour, we turn to some more general considerations which nevertheless still bear centrally on the nature of the body politic. It will be clear that all System B behaviours, that is, behaviours based on System B despite their individual differences, will have, in fact must have, points in common. The same holds true of System A. Additionally, the various examples of System A and System B behaviour respectively must differ consistently and definably from each other. Communism, fascism, Catholicism and other dogmas have been said to demonstrate closed-circuit thinking. This is their principal feature, that is, all proof of what is believed and any self-justification required is found within the system and not sought outside it. Furthermore, and conversely, no criticism from outside can ever get in. The system presents a continuous exterior. One may think here of the outer wall of the self-contained medieval city, or of the circle of covered wagons in American Western films around which the attacking Indians circle relatively helplessly, this being perhaps the appeal of that particular symbol. Not only are these individual dogmas impervious to the assaults of all other dogmas of whatever persuasion, but the totality of the dogmas of System B is still more impregnable to the totality of System A. That is, the two major systems as wholes also themselves make up closed circuits. This is shown diagrammatically in the two parts of figure 9A and B. There you go. Ooh. So that's figure 9, diagrammatic representation of the suggested closed-circuit nature of personality systems and subsystems. So the only way out is in. Big discussion. I discussed on my channel before I took my vids all down. People weren't ready to hear the truth then. Pre-convid. Right, okay. The only way out is in. Hint, you can work it out once you see through the deception of the duality. Okay. Big discussion. Is that the big discussion of socialism and capitalism? whether it will ever be a solution for a society that everyone can agree on. It will seem strange that magic has been placed in System A when hitherto we have... so we've got System B, neurosis, communism and religion, and then System A, psychosis, fascism and magic. It will seem strange that magic has been placed in System A when hitherto we have linked it to System B. The reason for this apparent reversal will be clear shortly. Making communism religion bedfellows may also seem a little unjustified. On the other hand, where has communism gained most ground, except in countries where religion was formerly strong, particularly in Catholic countries, but the Jews too have provided many converts and indeed initiators. Among what class of people have both these dogmas had most influence? Of course, here material poverty has also played a major role. One has no wish to be simplistic in these matters. Both socialism and religion preach the brotherhood of man. Both condemn war, though of course both employ it. Is it not the right wing which, on the whole, glorifies war? Reverting to figure 9 itself, what is of great interest and actually great significance is the mirror image which B gives of A. Thus, magic is to religion what fascism is to communism, and so on. The B phenomena are the feminine versions of the masculine forms of A. The B group are characterized by submission and collectiveness, the A group by dominance and individualism. How then is communism submissive, since it aggressively seeks world domination? The submissiveness in question is shown in the surrender of the individual to the majority or mass. The hero of communism is not the individual, but the masses, the people. Hence, of course, its condemnation of the cult of personality. Communism wishes to absorb or convert the rest of the world in the manner of an amoeba, so that at the end there is only one vast, relatively uniform, relatively indistinguished mass. Freedom exists only within that body. The sleight of hand logic here resembles a very similar piece of Christian thinking, the proposal that in serving God one is perfectly free, whose service is perfect freedom. To an outsider, freedom would necessarily seem to involve the right to reject the dogma if one wished. To the communist and Christian alike, to wish to reject the dogma means that one must be sick, deluded, lost or perverted. System A behaviours are, contrary-wise, assertive and individual. One thinks of the lone magician struggling to impose his will on the forces of the universe, the fascist dictator intent on domination, the desperately isolated schizophrenic trying to conquer, deny, encapsulate his feelings. There is a certain heroic quality about these figures and the incredible odds they face, which sometimes compel our unwilling admiration. Of such figures, Nietzsche is an excellent example, as is also Faust and the figure of Satan himself. It is perhaps purely a personal opinion, but are not communism and Christianity and neurotics in the long run boring? Trevor and Wright, the way one thinks can change the society one lives in, and is there a balance between such duality? Well, that's what we're sort of talking about here, really, is the balance between System A and System B, not letting yourself get drawn into the duality of picking one or the other. Some of the differences between the dogmas or subsystems of System B are, of course, those of B1 and B2. Thus, the communist is not only impervious to the promptings of religion, but anxious to destroy it, and vice versa. The subsystems, or dogmas, based on System A, have much less antagonism one to another. Therefore, a fascist schizophrenic or a fascist magician, or even a scientist schizophrenic, is by no means unthinkable. In this connection, one recalls the bizarre features of the Nazi concentration camp, or the fact that Hitler allegedly at times resorted to a magical divination. If the items of figure 9 are aligned in terms of their distance from or nearness to the opposing major system in each case, the following emerges: neurosis, religion, communism, magic, fascism, psychosis. Not all the reasons for this precise line-up may be immediately obvious, but they will become more so as the section proceeds. What one must consider is the amount of thinking involved on the B side and the amount of feeling permitted or recognised in the A camp. At this point, another feature of the model emerges, namely that the characteristics of a subsystem or dogma are partly actual and partly a function of the standpoint from which they are viewed. In Figure 10, are represented a number of sheets of cardboard painted yellow on one side and blue on the other. No matter from which point in the series they are viewed, all the boards viewed from the right look blue and all those viewed from the left look yellow. If in place of the colours blue and yellow one thinks instead of terms of System B and System A respectively, Figure 10b sees from that standpoint of religion, communism is a System A product, worldly, ungodly, thought rather than felt. The communist, from his viewpoint, sees religion as devoid of thought, dissociated from reality, the product of self-deception and wishful thinking, the opium of the people. To the fascist, however, these are precisely the hallmarks of communism, the opium of the working classes, full of wish attempts to turn sows' ears into silk purses, and so on. With this, a point has been reached where a major summarising step in the central argument can be taken. It is now proposed that all System B phenomena are conditions of trance, while all System A phenomena are conditions of trance resistance. The concept of trance resistance must, however, be further divided into trance manipulation and trance denial. In trance manipulation, the phenomena of System B are admitted to exist, to have validity, but are merely used by System A for its own purposes. In trance denial, however, the existence or the essential validity of System B is denied. The hallmark of a System B activity, as already suggested, is that it involves a reduction or giving up of volitional or individual freedom. This may be deliberate or can be involuntary and unpremeditated, as when someone falls in love. All are invariably communal or joining in activities involving at least one other person. The hallmark of System A activity is the gain or apparent gain in individual freedom or power. Thus, the practice of magic or the conditions of atheism is the willful disobedience of God, the setting up of man's laws, that is, the laws of the ego, over those of God or of fate and destiny. Hence, the Greek crime of hubris and the Christian sin of pride and self-assertion. Habitually, System A activities involve the idea of going it alone or joining out, exclusiveness, and excelling over other people, competitiveness. Table 6. Have we got Table 6? Oh, yeah. Now shows a number of I've only got a bit of Table 6 by the looks of it. Table 6 now shows a number of human behaviours, some already discussed, some not, assigned to their appropriate categories. There is some forcing here since the categories, as ever, are not wholly inflexible or watertight. A finer grain table, however, would complicate matters unnecessarily. Thus, psychoanalysis could have gone into the trance manipulation column along with ego psychology. It is partly a matter of whether one is undergoing psychoanalysis or practicing it. On the other hand, one cannot really practice psychoanalysis unless one also believes in it. With advertising, it is possible to be cynical or cold-blooded without necessarily being unsuccessful as a practitioner. The same is true to a lesser extent of magic, though less true still in the case of primitive or sympathetic magic. So we've got System B. So this goes from System B on the left to System A on the right, and then we go from deep trance to light trance to trance manipulation. So these are the columns. The left-hand column is deep trance, and then we've got light trance, and then we cross the line, and then we've got trance manipulation, trance denial, and extreme trance denial. We can see, for example, neurosis comes under deep trance, System B deep trance on the left-hand side, and psychosis comes under the right-hand side, far right extreme trance denial. We've got alchemy in the middle. That's where you want to be. What we got? The only way out is in. Yeah, I agree. We are society. but the compromise between those particular two will always create disagreement, so transcending it in an evolutionary way seems to be the only real solution, in my humble or honest opinion. Yeah, that's right. Journalism started out in life as the dispatching of news from one part of the world to another. Today, it is almost entirely a method of manipulating other people for profit or political ends. Business similarly begins neutrally as the handling of goods or services for a fee. Today, in the shape of big business, it wholly qualifies for inclusion amongst the manipulative practices. It is somewhat sad to see ego psychology in such bad company. It must be emphasized that its purpose, if manipulative in any sense, is the manipulation of the osteopath, having the final intention of liberating the individual. Such is not the intention of the other activities just discussed. Right, okay, so journalism and big business do not set out to liberate the individual, but an osteopath does. The extreme ends of the political scale, communism and fascism, are referred to as totalitarianism. There is some justification for ascribing this term to many other items off the table. Thus, experimental psychology, no less than psychoanalysis, is determined to describe all human behaviour in its terms. Business asks one question of all human activity: is it profitable? Advertising asks, how may this behaviour be used as a lever? And so on. Totalitarianism is an apt, perhaps even unconsciously apt term. The task is to make a whole or total out of what is actually only half. Both systems A and B wish to equally take over the whole personality and to destroy the other. This may seem to contradict the statement made earlier that System B does not manipulate System A. The difference is just that. System B does not tend to use System A for its own, i.e. System B ends. Getting rid of System A, however, is another matter entirely. The initial impetus towards System A or System B as the initial bias or basis of the individual personality is now suggested to be a genetic, inherited one. Developmental stages are also involved, however, since clearly more people are socialistic or romantic in adolescence and youth than they are in latter life. Many girls, for instance, pass through a strong religious phase in their teens, when there is an opposite tendency to be practical, hard-headed and conservative. Over and above the constitutional factors, there are additionally, of course, environmental and social pressures, a subject as far as possible avoided in this book. It is perhaps these which, in some measure, decide the particular overt form of the basic direction in the individual case. The genetic argument gains support too from the fact, no doubt to the bewilderment of those in authority, that each new generation seems to produce a crop of pro-radicals in fascist countries and a crop of anti-radicals in socialist countries, despite the fact that a majority of those holding such views in the previous generation were exterminated or deported, and that in the context of absolute control of the media and the education system, such views could not be expected to reappear. All System A views are ego-based or ego-centred. Logical extensions of the ego are one's direct ancestors and descendants, not so much, however, brothers and sisters or cadet branches, and also those who mirror one's ego in terms of status, title, rank and breeding, the old boy net. All System B views are self-centred. The self is defined at this point as the female equivalent of the ego. Extensions of the self are one's offspring, all of them, the children, the family in this sense. This is further extended to include the offspring of other mothers, especially similar mothers, in which context one recalls the religious admonition, love thy neighbour as thyself. One notes that members of the Socialist Party and the trade unions call each other brothers, as do some religious groups. Expressions like the family of man occur frequently. System B organisations are inclusive, and one becomes a member simply by asking to be. Knock and it shall be opened. And basically there are supposed to be no distinctions between individuals. We are all equal in the sight of God. As noted, System A organisations are exclusive. One needs really to be born into the correct caste, class or race, and even within this there may be grades. Election from the rank is possible, but rare, and the new arrival may well never come to be regarded as the equal of those who were there to start with. By contrast, in System B, the newcomer, the newly converted, has in some ways a higher place in than the already present. There is more joy over one sinner that repenteth than, as noted so frequently before, all attributes and characteristics of these two systems are opposite. By very reason of their fundamentally and essentially opposite nature, it is clear that it is never easy for two major systems, A and B, to coexist harmoniously. Each works against the other at every sort of level, psychologically, physiologically, biologically. There are also considerable, though not as great, difficulties involved in the peaceful coexistence of System B1 and B2. These exist within the same modality, so to speak. Where love has been, hate can also be. Depression only exists by virtue of elation, and so on, as argued out in Chapter 3. But thought can exist without feeling, and logic without emotion. Nonetheless, all systems, that is, each opposite system, sees the other as a threat, as essentially inimical to its purposes and to its very existence, at least at any given moment. Each system seeks to avoid its own destruction or displacement by destroying the other one first and once and for all. The tragedy of the situation is that the enterprise of putting the other system out of action is, for obvious reasons, doomed from the outset, and most of all when it succeeds or half succeeds. Questions from The Only Way Out is in. The right wing are in a trance, though, sometimes. Yeah. Let's have a look back over this. Deep trance, trance denial. And then, so why does he say they are in trance denial? Can you elaborate, please? Trance denial. At the moment, I can't elaborate on it. Yeah, it's the idea that the right wing are in a trance. I don't really know what that means. The right wing are in a trance. Because I don't think that's what he's saying trance denial is. I don't think it means like actually in a trance, like like you've been hypnotized or something. I don't think that's what he means by in a trance. Hypnosis is only deep trance. That's like the furthest on the left of the table. Deep trance is hypnosis, but I don't think it's that. I don't know. I wouldn't describe. I would just say that when people are in one mind or the other, they exist in a state of total denial of the other side, and so that appears as a sort of like a self-affirming mindset that you can't get out of. So I don't know, maybe that appears as a trance, and that Ralph Hexham there, in a trance or under a spell. Yeah, it does. We have got, the idea of magic in the right as well. But I just don't know. I don't really think that it's about. I don't really think that people are in an actual trance. I don't think that's what he's saying, that the left are in a trance. And the idea of people being in a trance. I mean in a trance as in enchanted by single heroic figures and belief in it rather than seeing the truth and the dark side of stuff as well. Yeah. So, as he said earlier, is that they do that people in System A do revere single figures because it's about individual achievement on the right, whereas so the left is more about group achievement. So the mass, the people do the work, whereas on the right it's one person does all the work. So you do have a lot of statues and things like that in Western society and in history, like pedestallation, specialization, and this, yeah, and then with that, what happens? So I guess what you're saying is that people put someone on a pedestal, and then that person turns out to not be necessarily the right person to put on a pedestal, and so it appears that people are just blindly following somebody, like one individual, and that does tend to be the downfall of a lot of right-wing movements, is that the impetus is one person, and when that one person disappears or changes what they think, then that throws the whole thing into disarray. And then that person might become some sort of blue-eyed hero for everybody. Right. One hardly needs comment on the appropriateness or relevance of the foregoing to international affairs. That is to say, this kind of thinking, this kind of reaction seems to characterize the attitudes of at least some nations to some others. One suggests, in fact, that a great many conflicts between nations are enacting out in the environment of this internal struggle. Clearly, in many wars, straightforward reality factors are also involved, the wish to acquire rich or fertile territory, to secure trade routes, and so on. War is frequently best understood psychologically as the clash of ego and ego. There are few things the ego enjoys more than fighting with and beating another ego. I believe, in fact, that all forms of competitive sport rest on this and solely on this foundation. Nevertheless, a further component in war, one suggests, is the struggle of System A with System B. This is seen, for example, in the current conflict between America and Russia. So that's obviously flipped around. Flipped around now. It still stands. Between the Protestants and the Catholics in the 30 Years' War, more currently again in the clash between the Orange and the Green in Northern Ireland. There are perhaps some grounds for further suggesting that while war between nations involves A versus B differences, persecution and oppression within a nation involves rather B2 against B1, are in short rather more sexual. However, the distinction is by no means clear-cut. So with this recent thing in Afghanistan, they've the one thing that all of the media is focused on is what does this mean for the women in Afghanistan? So yeah, I mean that does seem to ring true even there, is that you've got the struggle that's now, because once it was between obviously the West and the East, but now that the West is left, the struggle now just remains between the sexes. So what's going to happen to the women, and all that sort of thing. They're like a patriarchy or something. So yeah. For further general evidence, we might consider the Second World War. How did Britain see Nazi Germany? Certainly as an aggressor, B2, but more specifically as ruthless, cold-blooded and efficient. The Germans themselves as trained, heartless automata, System A. Britain saw herself as the kindly humanitarian defender, B1. How did the Nazis regard the Poles, the French, etc., and in particular the Jews and the Gypsies? As animals with animal appetites and animal habits, System B, especially B1. Like animals, or rather because they were animals, they could be herded into cattle trucks, corralled and either slaughtered or put to hard work. Their bones could legitimately be used for glue and their skin for leather. Well, we know that's all not true now. German youth, on the other hand, were urged to be as hard as steel, hart via Kruppstahl. Both the body as machine and the body as muscle were glorified, the body as sex rejected. Thus, head hair was cropped short and beards were unwelcome. It is the Jew and the socialist and the woman who are hairy, and so on. In the general context of persecution, and with a further glance at the genetic or inherited basis of the behaviour under discussion, the following remarks are also offered. It can be hypothesized that a majority of those individuals who voluntarily leave their own country to make a new life in another will be high in ego drive and ego qualities. In making this statement, one must of course exclude those forced to leave. It happens that all countries colonized from Europe are right-wing, materially prosperous and segregationist. North America, South Africa, Rhodesia, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. South America constitutes perhaps something of an exception both to these and later comments, but not entirely so. One hears already in imagination the cries of protest against such a sweeping generalization of the kind just made. How does one define right wing? What about the emancipation of the American woman? Perversely, one must again refuse to be drawn on definitions. However, in referring to the right wing, one is clearly talking about the kinds of behaviour discussed earlier in this section, authoritarianism, traditionalism, and the like. Taking up the point about American women, is it not true to say that the women in the colonial countries mentioned are less feminine than their European counterparts? It is French or Italian women, not American, South African or Australian women, who are considered to epitomise femininity. Do not these latter women show instead higher aggression and achievement drives? What one is suggesting is that the somewhat higher levels of ego-centeredness of these countries could be ascribed to their representing a non-random sample of the parent European gene pool, being instead a self-selected sample, more highly endowed with ego qualities. Are there any ways one could test this claim other than by administration of personality inventories of the kind described earlier, to obtain some estimate of the incidence and degree of radicalism and conservatism in a country? There are possible ways. Since we believe, for instance, that psychopathy tends to be associated with strong ego drives, without the corrective factor of strong libido drives, one would predict a higher incidence of crime generally, particularly of motiveless crimes, and a higher incidence of diagnosed psychopathy in the countries mentioned, excluding for this purpose any indigenous native populations in each case. Of course, one runs into considerable problems of definition and classification here. One has to bear in mind too that the issue is affected by many, many factors, such as the amount of opportunity each country offers for the working off of these basic antisocial tendencies in socially acceptable ways, e.g. by living a pioneer life in certain areas or by controlling the unruly or radical elements in the population. One's attention might therefore be focused on the police forces and police methods of these nations. Cross-cultural comparisons of this nature are, alas, always notoriously difficult, and one must certainly be wary of the temptation to oversimplify. Finally, these genetic matters under discussion might be a factor in the cycle of the degeneration of once powerful and warlike nations into decadence. Although an occasional war would make very little difference to the composition of a nature's gene pool or gene reservoir, continuous or near-continuous war over many generations might result in the death of a significant proportion of males high in ego qualities before they had time to produce offspring, the crucial point here. Human affairs, as we have said, are extremely complicated, and this book is emphatically not in the market for producing simple formula solutions to very complex situations. What is claimed, however, is that the basis of personality which is described in this book, in relation particularly to its inherited component, can be seen as one factor, an admittedly very important factor, in such situations as national politics and international relations, which are usually considered in total isolation from these matters and analysed as if the predisposing and motivational factors were inevitably conscious, self-evident, and above all, environmental. So, there you go. That's the end of that chapter. And that's ended just in time for the end of our show, our normally 1 hour show. The only way out is in idealistic far rightness. Yeah, good. Ralph Hexham, yeah, good point. I think they're sometimes under a spell unconsciously, which is what the book might be leading to. Trevor Wright, can dogma change its viewpoint to become neutral, or does it transform over time to maintain that belief? No, dogma is dogma, and anything outside of dogma is not dogma. So dogma eventually, so say the dogma of feminism. If I said I've got a new version of feminism, it involves beating women, that wouldn't be feminism. So it doesn't, the dogma is fixed, so you can't, it becomes something else once you add something to it, really. The same with capitalism, is that capitalism is capitalism if you try and add something to it. So if you said it's capitalism, but this time we're gonna give all the power to the people, so people will run everything themselves, then that's not capitalism anymore. So it will be rejected by everybody as not part of dogma, which is the problem with dogma, I suppose, is that dogma's fixed. Ralph Hexham, Samuel Colt liberated US women. Is that the guy who made the gun, the Colt? I don't know who Samuel Colt is. Ralph Hexham, the only way out is in. Like QAnon gay op, for example, it's trapped a chunk of the right like rabbits in headlights. Yeah, that's good point. And and the thing is, it's so something like QAnon is it traps. One thing that the right does tend to have is like a sort of the psychosis or their schizophrenia traps them in things like conspiracies. So the people on the left always use the idea that you're wrong. If you're on the right, you're wrong because conspiracies. And then people on the right do tend to get trapped in conspiracies. So things like QAnon, it becomes a sort of a way. It's an easy way of trapping people on the right because they like conspiracies. I don't know. Well, we do know it's something to do with System A being psychotic. Ralph Hexham, so it was a gun maker. Okay, good stuff. And then, cause I was looking up was it the Peacemaker? Was that a Colt? Was that a Colt gun, the Peacemaker? That's like the gun that won the West, I think. Pretty nice looking little gun. All right, so. Thanks for coming along again, and the Ralph Hexham Colt Peacemaker, manufactured 1873. Yes, a decent gun. Right, so I'm gonna go and get some sleep. As every week we try and leave this show and all go to bed. So that's the trick to a good life, is to go to bed. Give your system B a bit of time on its own. Go and have your other life. So yeah, thanks to The Only Way Out Is In, Ralph Hexham, Trevor Wright, and people in D Live. Thanks for coming along. And yeah, so I'm gonna sign out. I think that's what you say. Hold on, let me get to my sign out thing. Outro. Right.